Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 2. Chapter 4. You are progressing adequately. The addition of the suggested growth enhancement has been accepted. We will still have to complete various tests, but you are ahead of schedule by my calculations. Barris heard the words in her head, a slow, methodic voice ascribed to poetry or song, not the statement she had just heard. She breathed in a deep breath and felt the congestive pull of an apparatus attached to her mouth. With a mild panic, she opened her eyes to find herself again in the Bacta tank, submerged fully in its warm fluids. She apprised her hands, swaying them gently through the liquid and illuminator above, creating a bluish hue to her surroundings, contrasted with the olive pigmentation of the hand she was waving about. Barris squinted her eyes to look beyond her fingertips, to find the voice that had sung in her head. As before, the star-filled speckles of large, vacuous eyes filled her view, centered upon an oval head. A small mouth was moving below a barely perceptible nose in some wordless conversation. You are beautiful, child, and we are so proud of you. The song returned to her head. She felt the truth of it course through her body, its echoes resonating within her, wanting to be sung to again. Barris looked again upon the Kaminoan, the face fixated beyond the tank just out of reach. A shadow to the right of the opalescent creature caught her attention, a darkness within the dark. A figure with a long hood pulled over most of its head stood motionless. The Kaminoan was mouthing words again, drawing Barris's attention back to it, waiting patiently to hear the melodic string of words, but they did not come. An echo of unintelligible chanting filled the void of silence in her tank. Overlapping whispers consumed her mind, clarity beginning to shape the speech. Incantation, she thought to herself. She darted her gaze to the shadow form, knowing it was the source. The form began to move behind the Kaminoan, planting a foreboding sensation within her. She reached out as far as she could to bang a warning against the tank's inner surface, spitting out the breathing apparatus. She felt her eyes grow wide with apprehension, screaming out with everything she had. The Kaminoan's eyes suddenly flared open as a brilliant orange energy blade protruded from her upper chest. The Kaminoan looked briefly down upon the blade as it withdrew, then looked up and into Barris's eyes, her own returning to a more natural state. Barris was certain her diminutive mouth smiled a simple crease before her eyes closed entirely, and her body slumped forward and into the outside of the tank. Her screams abated, and Barris fumbled around for the fallen breathing tubes, careful not to allow any more of the fluid into her lungs. Latching onto it with her left hand, she quickly stuck it back in her mouth, the fluid returning to a stasis around her. She looked upon the Kaminoan again, seeing clearly as a desiccated yellowish hand emerged on the body's shoulder, casting it aside unceremoniously, revealing the entirety of the shadow form in its place. Two skeletal hands, flesh cracked, reached up to remove the hood over its head. Barris was consumed by recognition as soon as its chin was revealed. Unduly, Barris thought, glimpsing the tight pattern of triangles woven together into a band from neck to mouth. The hands continued to remove the hood, exposing her entire face. You share in the mockery and corruption through your memory of me, Padawan. The words formed in Barris's head despite Luminara's lips remaining motionless. This isn't possible. I saw them place your body into the cell on Stygian Prime, Barris thought. Without warning, Luminara's facial features pulled into themselves, the flesh flaying itself from the bone. A single bright blue eye remained a second longer than the rest of the organs, its gaze penetrating the very fabric of Barris's being, scarring her soul. Barris woke with a startled squelch, eyes flying wide, staring into a tuft of brilliant green needlegrass lying directly before her. Although able, she decided to remain motionless, to let her heartbeat return to normal. Another dream, she thought to herself, as the reality of her surroundings welcomed her to the pre-sun dawn of Ambria. Numerous insects sang their songs to one another as they busied themselves with their morning routines. The squawking of unknown avians occasionally broke the constant hum of insect wings, alerting their brethren of the bountiful harvest before them. Barris's heartbeat began normalizing as she pushed herself off the ground. Looking about her with hazy eyes, she was startled to see how vast these grasslands indeed were. Ambria's sun began cresting the western hills behind Barris, bathing the valley surrounding Lake Nath in its warmth and brilliant light. Although in the throes of contemplating her dream, she was startled again by the sights before her. Ambria had not been short of surprises since she exited hyperspace, and the breathtaking view before her was yet another. Brilliant colors exploded across the landscape. Variegated grasses, ranging from shades of white and cream to violets and indigos, swayed in the gentle breeze, sourced by the Tiranval Range kilometers distant, its silhouette dark blue and purple. Massive growths of wildflowers a meter wide shot tall, spiked plants covered in tiny orange and yellow flowers 5 meters off the ground. Like islands amidst the grassy ocean of the valley, they were everywhere. The orange and yellow flowers deferred to reds and pinks, blues and purples on others. Shockingly deep red plumes of feathery vegetation intermingled throughout her view. Barris couldn't identify the plumes as grass or flowers, but noticed several more thumpers from the night before grazing upon them lazily. She looked around for Erie or Quinn, spotting them near the lake's edge, sidled next to one another, drinking deeply from the water's edge. The contrast between what Barris was currently surrounded by and what she had prepared and researched before coming was overwhelmingly different. She was tempted to recheck her star charts, but she knew it would only reveal what she knew to be true. Her thoughts drifted to her Bacta sessions without prompting, her dreams still fresh in her memory and how the two may be related. Barris had assembled and arranged a compilation, standard days in length, of recordings taken from her notes and others regarding this planet's history, topography, and ancient and current civilizations that she played for herself while in Bacta Submersion. That submersion, however, differed from her dream in about every way possible. There were no Kaminoans under the employ of the Empire that she was aware of, and most certainly none to the best of her knowledge within the Sioux Recon Center on Coruscant. The background seen behind the Kaminoan was unfamiliar as well. The various panels and workstations were devoid of aesthetics. They were austere and sterile but bright and polished, again differing from the recovery room she had utilized at Sioux Recon, which was dark by necessity and absent any panel or workstation. Then there was the Bacta itself. She had personally chosen the settings she would utilize before submersion, double and sometimes triple the standard dosages, creating an ooze more than a fluid, one she would have a tough time seeing through. There were too many differences to ignore. The presence of her former master was a complete mystery to her, as was her comment, which Barris instinctively committed to memory. You share in the mockery and corruption through your memory of me, Padawan. She said the words aloud. Barris hadn't thought about Luminara and Dooley in some years until Ahsoka Tano brought her up a few months ago. Still, even then, she had blown it off and was ambivalent toward any connection she may have to her former master. It just simply didn't matter to her. So why would her subconscious have her believe that a connection may yet still exist? She did not have that answer. Barris's stomach growled with hunger, reminding her that 3 bites from a ration bar hours earlier would not satisfy her needs. Shaking her head from thought, she pushed herself up to her feet, kicking her foot against the white, luminous tuber root attached to a short stem, a small blue flower atop it. She picked it up to inspect it, feeling its firmness with her fingertips. Fresh, she asked the air before her, looking up toward her, thumpers. She was startled to see they had walked up to her and were standing only meters away. Quinn looked down at the root in her hand and nodded his head toward her. Barris looked again at the root, wet dirt clinging to its surface. She began walking toward the lake's edge, patting the fur on the necks of both animals as she passed them. She did not get another 5 meters before Quinn's form canted before her, barring passage to the water's edge. Barris looked him in the eyes, wondering what had gotten into the beast. She watched as the mane of hairs on his spine stood on end. She swung her gaze behind her to that of Erie, who was nodding back and forth. "Did you just tell me no?" Barris asked, knowing full well there wouldn't be a verbal answer. Barris sidestepped Quinn and doubled her pace to the water's edge. Again, Quinn cut in front of her and bowed his head low toward her chest before he pushed with his massive neck, taking her off her feet. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She was becoming quite agitated. As Barris scrambled with her long robe to regain her footing, Erie took up a position adjacent to Quinn, both intent on keeping her from reaching the lake's edge. "I just want to clean this," she said, holding out the tuba root, the dirt streaking long lines of black along its white surface. Quinn looked at the root and approached, carefully placing his mouth above Barris's outstretched hand. Without warning, a long black tongue shot forth and covered the root, licking the dirt clean and drenching her hand in its saliva. It took a few moments to pass before comprehension took hold, and wasn't sure if she should thank the animal or turn her body to retch what contents her stomach held. The dirt she may have been able to overcome. Now, however, the root was untouchable, and she had to stop herself from dropping it altogether. Barris understood what Quinn had done and was genuinely thankful for the effort, but now she needed to get to the water more than ever. They would not let her near the lake for whatever reason, and she was sound enough in biology to understand that something had defeated. She bowed a calculated thank you toward the thumper, then smacked her lips together noisily while mimicking drinking. Erie caught on immediately. The light-colored thumper snorted quietly before letting loose a high-pitched squeal and nudged Barris in the shoulder while lowering her own. "Huh?" Barris said awkwardly. Erie tried to convey her message more directly by lowering her body toward the ground, Quinn nudging Barris's shoulder, this time toward his mate. "Ah," she elicited an unexpected understanding. "This will be a first for me, girl," Barris said truthfully to her imprinted beast. Erie only nodded as Barris grabbed the sides of her neck, seated herself in a natural notch along its spine, and rolled the long hairs into her left fist. The seat was perfect for her form, a surprise in and of itself. She instinctively pressed her legs into the side of Erie. She locked herself in place as the animal raised itself off the ground and threw her head back with another high-pitched squeal, answered in kind with a deeper squeal from Quinn, who lowered his head as he broke into a sprint through the grasses. Erie sprang from her pose and was at near full speed within seconds, closely following her mate. Barris felt exhilaration immediately as the wind caressed her face, making her acutely aware of every sense she possessed. The changing scents of the flora around her whisked in and out of her nose, creating a refreshing mixture of forced air that felt cleansing within her lungs. She was aware of the power within the beast under her. Not a centimeter of fat seemed to exist as she felt a surprising packet of muscle and tendon with each thumper's long stride. Barris lowered her head momentarily to settle close to Erie's left ear. "Faster!" she shouted, hoping it was loud enough to contend with the forewind being created. Barris felt a tightening of every muscle she could sense as Erie burst forth with more speed, wholly unrestrained and feeling transformed in several senses. She lifted her head to the sky and bellowed a high-pitched squeal of delight, doing her best to mimic the thumper's throaty cry. Erie responded with her own, matching the tone of her rider. Barris could hear a third cry before her, Quinn, she realized, adding his stanza to the song the three of them were creating. The grasses whipped past her legs as Barris felt them under the lengthy cloak and knee-length leather boots. Although the barriers existed, the grasses felt light and soft, instead of abrasive or sharp as she had expected them to be. Barris took a moment to look around her from her heightened perch, watching as the natural winds whipped the tall grasses into waves of vegetation, preferring contrasting colors and the illusion of movement as the cream-colored grasses mingled with each bend into the bright greens. "This is beautiful," Barris couldn't help but say aloud. She focused on the mountains looming before them, still many kilometers away, as the purplish hue attested. She knew she needed to reach them and find her canyon. She also knew that she would have to continue to remind herself of these objectives, as the beauty and wonder she had already experienced could easily make her forget. Quinn began to slow, and subsequently Eerie did as well. The three neared a larger congregation of the island-like clumps of sky-reaching flowers. Although Barris couldn't see it, she could hear the babbling of water flowing rapidly over small stones as the wind rush began to fade. She could hear the congregating hum of the buzzing insects all about her and the raw, naked calls of the birds that fed on them, sounds that only increased the closer they came to the copse of vegetation. As the tall grasses began to give way to shorter varieties, she could see numerous small, fur-covered quadrupeds chewing away at the lush, light purple blades. Again, contrary to her expectations, Ambria was teeming with life. Quinn had slowed to an organized walk, Eerie following suit, until they both stopped in a small clearing of purple grasses. Eerie lowered herself to sit on the ground, allowing Barris an easy dismount. She continued to sit upon the thumper a few moments longer, closing her eyes as she released her grip on the animal's spinal mane of hair. Barris opened herself fully to the force for the first time since arriving, letting it course through her entire body, basking in its nourishment and tasking it to bridge connections with every living thing around her, practices she hadn't employed since I was a Padawan. She finished the thought with a whisper into the warm morning air. Barris's mind was instantly in turmoil, her memories mingled with her current teachings and philosophies, creating a sickly feeling that Eerie was attuned to. The thumper beneath her began to purr, an ability Barris hadn't known crazy thumpers to possess. Eerie's vibrating vocals were almost inaudible, but her entire body responded with tiny matching muscle twitches, which massaged Barris into a less conflicted state. Although she could not explain the workings of the ability, Barris backed up from her seated position and lay forward with her head to the side, just to the side along Eerie's spine. Whether the thumper was innately born with the ability or it was learned somewhere along the line, she didn't care to know, only that it was soothing her to her very core. Barris dropped both arms to either side as the side of Eerie to allow for more contact between herself and the animal, embracing the action literally. Her mind began to pursue its path through actions, not necessarily caring if her understanding of the Force had more to do with either extreme. For reasons she could not even contemplate, her thoughts drifted toward Ahsoka Tano, surprising her. Mental flashes of conflict, anger, and hatred dared her surroundings to release the Mary Allen back into their grip. But between the calming effect of the thumper and the focused path Barris's mind had become, the turmoil folded in upon itself and diminished into an afterthought. Barris had no sense of time as she lay upon Eerie's back, but the animal sensed the ease of tenseness and the release of the mental tension within her rider enough to cease the calming effect she had employed. Barris remembered she was hungry and sat up, snatching the tuber root from the folds of her robes. She dismounted Eerie and felt her soft leather boots squished into the saturated ground, understanding why the smaller animals were feeding on the plants here. She plucked a purple blade between her fingers, snapped it off its base, and inhaled deeply. The scent of viability and newness assailed her, only adding to the thrill and exhilaration of breathing in the life all around her. She stepped forward, toward the babbling of water, just inside the thicket of towering flowers, as her booted foot sunk to her ankle in the moisture-rich soil. Eerie and Quinn stared at her as she rocked back and forth, regaining her balance. To correct her stance, she placed the other foot a little closer to the copse, it too sinking to the ankle. Wavering back and forth with arms flailing wildly, Barris tipped too far back and lost her balance completely, falling into the wet ground on her backside. Her understanding of Crazy Thumper's social behaviors getting a workout, she turned to see both animals fixated on her with wide, toothy grins, making a sound with short inhales and exhales of breath closely resembling laughter. Barris had a sudden, but insanely brief flash of anger, but reason dictated that she couldn't focus that anger on anything save her naivety. She intuitively knew harboring anger toward herself was a useless gesture and let the anger evaporate. Instead, she focused on her clumsiness and found the humor within her own arrogance. Barris turned her gaze back toward the sound of running water and began to chuckle in tune with the mated pair of thumpers behind her. The sounds both Quinn and Erie made grew in intensity and volume, which fed Barris's reaction to her situation, finally letting go of the overwhelming need to laugh. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she gave in to that impulse. Another brief flash from the past, igniting and extinguishing within the span of a single breath, answered her question for her. Never. She bridged that past to her current state, her present, and realized she was entirely in control of herself. An exhilarating feeling flooded her between deep inhales of the fresh air, and she laughed harder than she ever had in her life, falling back wholly into the saturated soil with an enormous smile stretched across her face, and her now involuntarily laughter echoing through the small plot in the extensive valley around them.